can do. RNG are your nightmare.
Set it off like this. Set it off like. Set it off like this. Burn it up, burn it up.
Welcome back to MSI 2022 in Busan, South Korea. 3 teams remain in the battle for regional glory, and today T1 and G2 Esports are looking to earn a shot at reigning champions RNG in tomorrow's final. Possibly the best entrance we've had to date here for any team as they make their way into the arena. This is a rematch of the classic 2019 matchup, and the LCK Titans finally have their chance for revenge in a best-of-5. I am Dash, joined by Emily Rand and Dagda to kick things off here today. As we said, only 3 teams remain. 2 best-of-5s stand between us and crowning the best team in the world to date. How y'all feeling?
I'm so excited.
Yeah, you ready?
I'm so hyped. I'm so ready.
Well, you're probably feeling pretty good. You've already got 1 team that you cast on a somewhat regular basis into the finals. A second team that you also represent as a shot
I love the way
through.
I came out today and like the stylist backstage insisted I wear the LEC logo. It's like, I'm completely not biased here today, you know?
I love it. Quick refresher on the bracket, the way things shook out yesterday. Royal Never Give Up accomplished a 3-0 sweep over Evil Geniuses to book their ticket into the finals and that shot at defending their title.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at RNG, they played exactly as expected, right? Like, their understanding of the way that they can react to, even when EG looked like they were in winning positions, RNG still seemed to have a much better understanding and control over the map. I also really like their responses in draft. Every time that EG tried to kind of throw a curveball at them, they always had an answer. And I mean, it was just exactly what I expected from what I've seen of them.
Yeah, and I think it was really interesting to see things like the Lysandra come out from Xiaohu. It's something that we haven't seen a huge amount domestically or even over the course of his career, right? But having that pick come out, kind of him being the more engaged setup, and also just how well he was able to play around the fog of war, like as Emily was pointing out, like spraying through side lanes, then dipping into the fog of war and just finding these quick picks. It was super fun to see how they were able to bring these games back, especially against an EG that looks so good.
Yeah, very creative angles on a number of the engages. You mentioned Lysandra, got to call it the Braum as well. That's one of those responses to the MF curveball that was thrown. A 3-0, yes, dominant scoreline, but I think at the same time we also have to recognize, especially those last 2 games, at times the closeness of the series and the opportunities that EG had here on the international stage.
I really love this EG team so much, honestly, because every time I watch them go through kind of a best of journey, they improve with every series, right? So like, even though obviously this series scoreline was definitely not what they would have been hoping for, I think we saw a lot of really good looks from EG. Obviously JoJo had like some highlight moments, and then I think honestly the biggest discrepancy is that RNG just had a much better understanding of the map, a much better understanding of set plays.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see how they have improved over the course of time, like what they can do when they actually sit down and kind of review those VODs, right? Because it feels like, as you say, Jojo Pyun, I think him kind of stepping up over the course of the whole tournament, especially when you look at groups, kind of having that, his troubles against Caps and G2, right? But you saw him kind of take those learnings and then grow from that, having those moments where he had the big pop-off performance in side lanes, and then as well as the team kind of went on, like taking team fights against RNG is not an easy task, and they look great.
Yeah, and as I think it was you who said it on desk yesterday, but you're like, if I'm EG, I'm actually looking at RNG in the VODs, right? Because I think a lot of the things that EG want to do and want to set up, RNG just do so much better. So I hope that they can really take it as a learning experience to go into the LCS Summer Split, because I can't wait to see them back.
Yeah, obviously always things you can learn from your own play, but just as easily looking at the team that beat you and what they did that much better is another great learning tool. Thoughts on RNG, though, as they book their ticket into that final to defend their crown as MSI champions. Is this the team to beat, or are we already kind of comfortable calling them the favorites regardless of what happens today?
I think they're the team to beat. I think, though, and we've been talking about this, we've been talking about it with Lyric, they're exactly the team we expected to see. I've not seen anything super shocking about RNG. They've played at this tournament exactly like what we saw from them in season. And that means that they haven't had the same like super highs and super lows a lot of other teams have had, which I think has been good for them.
Yeah, I mean, look, as the LPL guy, I'd love to come in and go, yeah, they're great, they're wonderful, smooth sailing. But I mean, look, it's the LPL representative, right? At the end of the day, you can see where the issues lie in the early game, how they can be exploited. And I think it's just a matter of time until teams kind of figure out how to go against that. But it's a case of whether you can match up in the mid game. Because like I said yesterday in the desk, it feels like you're an Elden Ring boss, right? You can get through phase 1, but how do you do in phase 2?
Yeah, admittedly, I get a little frustrated at Lyric's lack of confidence in this squad.
Oh, yeah, he was like shaking yesterday when RNG were winning.
Yeah. Get behind your boys. All right, well, that was yesterday's series. Today, we're gearing up for our second semifinal. It's G2 Esports versus T1. Now, Caps shared his thoughts coming into the knockouts just yesterday.
So the Rumble stage has been quite the roller coaster. I think team atmosphere right now is a bit complicated. The first day felt amazing, and the second day felt also really good, while the last 2 days have been kind of a disaster. I mean, everyone is trying their hardest to keep a light mood, but it can be difficult when you're going through a lot of losses at important games. Everyone is upset with their own performance, but I'm sure we'll be able to reset for tomorrow. Winning MSI would mean a lot to me, not only because it proves that Europe is a strong region, but also because when you go through all these like hardships and a bunch of losses or a bunch of wins, to finally come out with a decisive win in the end and actually win the tournament, that is such an important feeling, and it means so much. And it kind of proves that regardless of what you go through in life, you can always come out on top.
Despite being semi-finalists at Worlds, T1 had a tumultuous 2021. From constant roster changes to the coaching staff leaving in the middle of the split in summer, it was largely a year of iteration and adaptation for T1, only really settling on a roster when they made their way to Worlds. The team in 2021 was largely the same as what you see now, but without the polish, without Zeus for most of the time, and without a split under their belt, playing with their one chosen roster. You may see the logo of T1 and FLICKR in the mid lane and feel nostalgic for the SKT days, but this is a very different team to the champions of the past.
G2, on the other hand, in 2021 had the strongest roster EU had ever seen on paper. In reality, it was mediocre at best, and for fan expectations, it was an absolute disappointment. So in 2022, G2 rebuilt, bringing in an all-new coaching staff, a new top laner, and Schalke's Broken Blade. And for the first time in a long time, they invested in young talent, FLICKR and Targamas.
In contrast to G2, T1 made no changes to their roster at all coming into 2022, outside of moving Zeus from sub to starter. And while it's well known that T1 went undefeated leading up to MSI, what's been a little lost was the fact that the LCK is a best-of-3 region. And while they only dropped a single game in their playoff run against Gen G, during the season it was common to see T1 down a game against almost any team in the LCK. They lost games to Fred at Brion, Harmwell Life, Live Sandbox, Nongshim Red Force, all the teams who failed to make playoffs. But ultimately, T1 claimed victory. This is the difference between the T1s and SKTs of the past and the T1 we see today. They're not scared of taking risks. They will flip Barons, as you rightly know. They will take the 50-50 engage, and they will do it with the foundation of years of immaculate macro experience from the most successful player League of Legends has ever seen.
Well, the LEC is a best-of-1 region, so G2 losing to bottom and top teams alike meant not so smooth sailing. They weren't immediate favorites. They had a ton of up and down games where the new players and new lineups just didn't seem to click. And while Jankos remained a rock for the team, the once unstoppable Caps wasn't even a top 3 mid laner in the league for most of the season. At first, it looked like playoffs would be a similar story. G2's first best of 5 versus Fnatic saw countless creative draft strategies really fail to leave a mark. But then everything changed for G2. As they built up 3-0 after 3-0, and in the final weekend, Caps came alive, dominating Fnatic and Rogue in back-to-back clean sweeps, a 12-0 streak that would continue through MSI. Now, stage 1 was effortless for both G2 and T1, but in Rumble, G2 found the edge, and as their streak continued, G2 were, in the eyes of the audience, for 2 days at least, the best team in the world.
And during those 2 days, everyone was wondering what had happened to T1. I think we can all agree that Gumushi had not played at the level we saw domestically, but Zeus stepped up where he faltered. Despite those 2 days, T1 dropped a total of 3 games, all against teams they also managed to beat, true to their LCK performance in 2022. Even if Gumushi can't find his form, he still has the LCK Spring MVP carrier at his side, the LCK Finals MVP owner behind him, and alongside them, FLICKR and Zeus, the greatest player in the history of the sport and the best performing player at this tournament. This is why T1 is so scary. There's always another carry ready to take over.
Sadly for G2, there wasn't always another carry or another win. And while T1 found themselves after those 2 days of struggle, G2 were quickly lost. They lost 5 consecutive games to top and bottom teams alike. While they found themselves a brief moment of redemption versus EG and the LCS, you have to wonder as we head into this best of 5, which version of G2 will we see today? And if Caps can once again take down FLICKR and the LCK. And additionally, because you're all really superstitious about monologues, I've also invited Dash up here to say something else. Dash, can you just say a few words?
Yeah, a few words.
Thanks. Technically,
What the
no
hell?
longer a
Dude,
monologue. This was
it's
a
a
dialogue.
dialogue.
Yeah, we had it.
I came.
No.
This
You
was a
spoke
team effort.
alone.
Yeah, we just had a dialogue. These teams faced off in an epic duel in 2019, and the featured matchup is now, as it was then, FLICKR versus Caps, presented by Mercedes-Benz.
As a mid laner, it is inevitable to be compared to FLICKR. He is our great one, responsible for the greatest play in league history and carrying home no less than 3 world championships.
They will be the Season 3 World Champions. First ever 2-time World Champions. First blood to baby FLICKR.
Being compared to FLICKR back then was the highest of compliments you could give a mid laner. His skill and work ethic seemed to make him untouchable.
He was like big inspiration. That's why I want to become good at League, because I saw him in like Season 3 Worlds. And playing against him now, 9 years later, is kind of crazy.
A rivalry between these 2 players, between these 2 teams, used to be unthinkable. Now the pride of EU is looking to step up once again. Caps may be in the running for the best right now, but no one is even close to taking away the title of the greatest ever.
G2 Esports eliminates SK Telecom.
Truly being built differently is when you recognize and respect your opponent. These 2 may have opposite personalities and even playstyles, but the respect and drive that fuels them to win is unrivaled.
This is it! The greatest team in the history of League of Legends, taken down by the greatest team Europe has ever produced!
In this featured matchup powered by Mercedes, will this be FLICKR's triumphant return? Can this legendary veteran show he is still a champion, or will Caps laugh all the way to the finals once again?
And how could our featured matchup be anyone other than FLICKR versus Caps?
I mean, it's such a storied matchup, right? Like, you look even from Caps, who's always beaten FLICKR in an international best of 5. When you look at, like, historically for G2, they could never get the best of SKT until Caps joined the roster in 2019. And then you look at how close that, like, run in 2019 was between, like, Worlds and MSI, whereas back and forth over who could get control of this mid lane matchup. And I actually had a quick look at, like, the goal difference of 15 between these 2 in that period. It was 19 goals at 15 was the difference between these 2.
Whose favor?
In FLICKR's favor.
Okay, I was going to say, that is actually such a cool stat.
Yeah.
It's so incredibly close between these 2.
And I think when we look at how they play for their teams now, it's no other team plays around their mid laner like G2 plays around Caps, right? Like, if I'm looking at the way, what they want him to do, he is the primary carry, right? Where FLICKR is really phenomenal at knowing his roam timings, and he's going to affect their side lanes. In particular, he typically goes top side to join up with Owner for some top lane dives. And I think that is the main difference when you're looking at them on their teams now.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to see even just the way that they interact with their junglers, right, as well. Because you look at the way Yanko sets up Caps for success, where it's either a case we're going to gank him, we're going to get a bunch of kills there, but even correcting him when he's in terrible matchups and making sure that he can get these advantages to then step up as the big team fight carry. Whereas, as Emily's already pointed out, with FLICKR, it's much more about him linking up with Owner, working off of roam timings, and making sure that he can go for these multi-man dives, typically towards that top side of the map.
And the statistics support it. In a minute, we'll see them up on broadcast, but the damage percent for Caps, 26.7%. That's highest at this event. Meanwhile, for FLICKR, 21.9%. And that's because he is spreading his influence to other T1 carries, in particular, Zeus on the top side. You can also see this reflected in their forward percentage. Just these 2 teams revolve around their mid laners, but in very different ways.
Yeah, Caps owning the head-to-head all-time in this matchup, but importantly at this tournament, they stand 1-1, poised perfectly even going into the best of 5.
Yeah, but even when you look at like that 1-1, right, it's actually like heavily skewed in favor of FLICKR in those first 30 stages, right? Like, you're looking at over 1,000 goal difference in favor of FLICKR for both games in those initial matchups, and it was those late game team fights that really brought G2 back and Caps that success.
Now, with that, I got to jump back to your point about how G2 plays around Caps, how integral Caps is to the success and the identity of G2. And we see that play out right behind us in this graphic.
Oh, nice. They moved it. You can see the corky behind there. Caps with the blade.
FLICKR, what's going on, bro?
Shared champions and then Caps is just wilding out here. I think it also points to something that we've seen as a G2 strength at times, which is their draft creativity. They came into this tournament, they had the best meta read, and again, a lot of that starts with Caps, his flexibility, and also how they play around him as either a primary or a secondary carry, depending on what Jankos is playing as well.
Yeah, but you can see from like FLICKR's champion pool, right? The whole idea here is about, hey, look, we want to get out, have mid lane presence that can then share its presence in the side lane with like LeBlanc being able to roam, TF being able to roam, and even the Silas being picked up and within answers to Twisted Fates and Gallios and these kind of things. He's wanting to match the presence on side, and I think that's where you're seeing the reason we're seeing these massive early game advantages for T1 in this matchup specifically.
And to be fair, barring the Galio and a little bit of the Corki, the majority of the mid lane is playing these 5 champions here. So it's not like, FLICKR really isn't reaching or stretching in a way that we need him to stretch for T1 to find success. Now, since their 4-0 start in the Rumble stage, G2 and Caps have struggled at MSI, and Dracos will look at an area of improvement in neighborhood tactics presented by State Farm.
Thank you very much, Dash. Heralds are, of course, incredibly crucial for any team. T1's early game dominance is due in part to how fantastic they are at setting up around Herald. For G2, that has not been the case, and especially against T1. We're going to take a look at 2 Herald clips today, both going wrong for different reasons. Remember, whenever you're taking a Herald, you either want the Herald, that guaranteed money, or you want to make a play on the opposite side of the map. And in this first clip, what we're going to see here is that T1 are absolutely set up to take the Herald. And as we zoom in on this minimap, FLICKR on the bottom side, you'll notice is coming to this wave late. This means that he cannot get to the Herald first without giving up something in return. That means that Tristana is going to move up first. Very easy time for the Tristana to come. T1 are going to have a man advantage at this Herald fight. Now, this means that G2, short of being willing to sacrifice a ton of CS, have no reason to fight this Herald. They have no reason to be there. Their support is level 5 to the level 6 on the opposite side. Now, despite that, as we roll out of the clip, you're going to see what we generally in the business like to call the tourist Herald. Now, I get it. They're legendary heralds. You want to spectate, you're in Busan, but G2 rather, do absolutely nothing in this play. They spend a ton of time, they stand around, they posture, they look menacing, they look tough, but ultimately they lose a herald in exchange for a single tower plate in FLICKR. This is a horrible, horrible trade. Now the second game, things get a little bit better for G2, you would think, because now they're moving FLICKR up. They say, hey, you know what, we're willing, as we pause it here, we are willing to sacrifice a bit on the bottom side to get FLICKR to come to the Herald. They're going to have that man advantage. They're going to secure that Herald. Here's the downside. It's easy to forget with all these new fancy champions, the Kaisas coming back, what exactly Aphelios does as a champion. But I want you to keep your eyes on Gumayushi. Yes, G2 are going to get the Herald. Keep your eyes on that Aphelios. Now, if you know Aphelios, you know this is the only champion in the game alongside Tristana that can never be left alone with a tower. That is 5 plates in the back pocket of Guma for a Herald that will ultimately take 2. Now, as the game continues, they'll move to the top side. Guma will use his newfound power. Before those plays, keep in mind, he was behind in lane. He was dove, he was misplaying, but now he's wildly ahead. He ends up getting 9 plates in this game. He ends up snowballing, and the team absolutely dominates. So for G2, respect those picks. Respect the unique strengths of Aphelios and Tristana. And while it's good to match on the Herald, you don't need to be spectators to it. Fight it or don't fight it. That's it for Neighborhood Tactics. Back to Dash and the desk to talk about drafts.
There you have it. I mean, we've talked about T1 all tournament long, one of the best early game teams we have here, and that in large part is the reason why. They've identified when they can go for certain things and when they cannot, and they still manage to find something cross-map when they can. I'm also kicking myself now because that first clip that he showed, very importantly, you'll notice that Keria goes mid lane, shares CS with this mid laner to hit that level 6, which if a fight is to come will be very impactful. And that was something we saw last year, if I recall correctly, at MSI, piloted by RNG, very specifically, intelligently moving their support up and kind of pioneering that entire strategy around the Rift Herald.
Yeah, I think especially for Ming was just very good to see him kind of the way they were able to integrate him into not only the top lane dives, but also fighting for the Rift Herald. So you got your setup on top side, then you'd get the presence mid, and you'd move up towards Rift Herald, and something that T1 do a lot as well, right? You're looking at the way they play around Zeus. Now it's Keria sometimes getting involved in the mid lane push, but it's certainly much more focused around, hey, if we can get our top side ahead, that turns into a massive Rift Herald presence.
Well, we'll find out if G2 is watching Dracos' clips soon enough when that first Rift Herald spawns and the teams either collapse or don't. For From there, though, I do want to go into a bit of a draft-focused conversation because, as we mentioned, that's both where G2 at times has found the most success, and we've talked about very early on in the tournament kind of was defining and pushing the boundaries of the meta. But likewise, we've also maybe had a couple stumbles in that realm. So we're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly here.
Yeah, so this is the initial Anivia draft, and as someone who has watched a lot of Evil Geniuses, knows what they like to do around team fights, this is great, right? Like, this is perfect against what they want to do. And then additionally, I love, again, Pyke is something we've talked about on Desk as being high prio for G2. I don't see G2 as like a super strong 2v2 bot lane, right? I think they're best when FLICKR is carrying in team fights and Targamas is hitting those roam timers to go mid or top.
Yeah, and I want to point out the Anivia here. I was absolutely in love with this because I looked across to the opposite side. I was like, oh, you've got Ryze who wants to try and push in his lane, look for roams and side lanes, but you don't really have a jungler in the Karthus who can kind of help facilitate that push. He much more wants to try and farm it out. So when I saw the Anivia come through, I was like, this is genius, right? Because now you just get to full push the wave. You win out in the stronger mid-jungle 2v2 because you got the Graves there. And that Anivia means that she can continuously keep Ryze in check. So you never actually get Jojo Pyun to roam. And even when you have Jankos going for these level 3 ganks in the mid lane, suddenly this Anivia is massive. You get to play for the team fights like Emily was pointing out. It was such a good addition and a cool adaptation we haven't seen in so long coming through from G2.
I was in North America, 1 a.m. watching that game. The Anivia pick comes through, and I almost threw my headset across the room. So I was like, that's it. That's the end of the game. It was such an intelligent pick to bring in, and it really did feel like it had a massive effect on the outcome of the game. That's some of the good. Let's talk about some of the ugly against RNG.
Ta-da! This is the Riven draft. I think the big thing for me is that when I look at Broken Blade, I think he is a phenomenal carry player. So the idea of putting him on something where he's just going to stomp lane, I don't disagree with in terms of his skill, but when I do think of G2's success and when they've been successful, I definitely think it's more in line with him being on something like, I mean, we saw the Ornn come out a ton in playoffs, but then like the Aatrox, the Vladimir, something where he's frontlining, joining up for team fights so that G2 can hit the mid game, again, with strong team fighting.
Yeah, and I think that's the big one for this draft as well, is that you're looking at, okay, well, we traditionally want to see Broken Blade on something that can zone or be that big frontline tool. You're running the TP and the Ignite on this Riven, so you're not going to have those big flash engages that you traditionally think of when you see the Riven. But also, if you're looking towards a mid-game, right, this is a composition that if it falls behind early, doesn't do particularly well. So when we end up hitting that late or that mid-game spot, it was just like, oh, well, we've got no damage left in the tank, no frontline. Like, what are we trying to do here?
And I'm so glad you brought that up because there actually is a play on the top side that sets the Riven ahead early. So then this lane that you really want to be like super dominant right into Bin's Gwen just doesn't end up panning out from the get-go.
All right, let's flip to the other side of things and take a look at T1's draft. We can't go ahead and criticize and go in depth on one and not the other. Starting again with the good.
Yeah, I mean, this one for me was kind of looking to see how T1 were able to use their advantages here to try and push ahead with the TF and that kind of stuff. But I think the big one was kind of looking again how they utilize the Twisted Fate in towards those side lane plays, right? Where you're able to start to roam out, get the FLICKR ahead, and then leaning in towards the top side for carry. And the whole idea for this was trying to get the Kennen ahead, and I actually liked it from the get-go. But I think the big problem for T1 with this draft was then how they tried to play it in the later portion of the game, which is where they didn't actually try to play for side lanes, right? Didn't try to draw G2 out. Instead, they end up running head first into this G2 composition, which then allowed the Diana and the Yasuo to have this great combo that was working super well, and that's where I think the big problem started.
Yeah, I mean, I just like, I like when they put Gumayusi on something where he can end up like chewing through turrets early and then rotating him around the map. I think T1, like that's one of their strengths in the early game and one of the things I like best about them.
From there to their game against RNG, criticisms.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for RNG here, like, this is where I'm kind of looking and going, okay, well, we've got the affiliates that you can try and work with to push in on the bottom side, but I have to keep turning around because I can't see the thing on the backside. But
you're in the unfortunate middle seat.
Yeah. Like, all right, here's my big
ping-ponging back and forth.
You know, the front seat in the cinema where you're bouncing back and forth. But
I was gonna say, I can get up and like point out champions if you want.
But yeah, I think for here, at least again, you've kind of got the Twisted Fate that can try and play around side lanes to get the Aphelios ahead in the bottom side of the map. But it looks like when you look across at T1, having this Lee Sin not being able to kind of get that setup that they wanted in the mid lane. But then when you start to push in towards the later portion of the game, the Twisted Fate is just able to roam around the map and get so much done working with the Viego. You've got good late game scaling and good setup for the Viego and the Aphelios and team fights as well. And even looking at the Xayah, right? Like, how do you try and play this composition as a Xayah? Because you can get the one ultimate for yourself with the Feather Storm to kind of bounce back out. But I mean, you've got a Gangplank that's going to be able to slow you down. You've got good backline access with the Twisted Fate. Viego diving on you as well. It just became really, really tough for T1 to actually enact any sort of game plan.
Beautifully said and beautifully executed. Dramatic chair turn. Sad we missed that one on camera. Now, obviously, plenty of advantages can be won or lost in draft, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the play on the stage. And as we've already talked about the mid lane matchup and how important it is, I now want to jump to the top side of things. We're just minutes away from the introductions themselves, so key players. I think this has to be the other matchup that we look at. I mean, just when you see the left column here on these statistics, it tells you that this match can be won and lost here in the top lane.
He's doing almost he has a kill participation that's almost a third of his team's total kills as a top laner. First in damage percent of all top laners as well, again, at almost 30%. I think the other most impressive thing, again, is the way that T1 facilitates this, right? So I talked about how, like, one draft we didn't see was the Aphelios Rumble draft that I really loved from T1, where they're just like, okay, you know what? We're going back to something that Guma's super comfortable on. Draco's kind of already pointed out how that Aphelios got ahead in terms of, not taking the Herald and taking those turret plates instead. And then I think Zeus on the Rumble was just phenomenal. Even when he got targeted, he was always able to clear out the lane, able to stay like even enough in that matchup. And just the way they play around him with set plays, FLICKR roaming top, Owner going up there, I think is really, really strong.
Yeah, I mean, Zeus has honestly been one of my favorite players to watch all tournament long. He's been so incredibly strong. And I think the one criticism that I have of T1 is I'd love to actually see them try and utilize him a little bit more in side lanes. I think when Zeus is able to get these massive leads, we've seen on Gangplank, the Aurelia, like you're seeing on your screen, I think there's moments where they could just leave Zeus in side lanes to annihilate people like Bin. Thank you very much. But I think from a carry standpoint, you can see the damage numbers are there. And on the flip side, I want to kind of see the opposite from G2, right? Like, we've seen Zeus step up as this massive carry. I actually want to see Broken Blade kind of take a step back and go, right, I am going to play more like we saw domestically, right? Because when you look at G2 in LEC playoffs, it was a case of, hey, we're going to go towards Ornn. We're going to set up FLICKR as a big team fight carry. And it was a definitive shift in style that we saw after that first round against Fnatic. So I definitely want to see kind of the Ornns, the Vladimirs that we were kind of highlighting, these kind of things where he can play the presence in the front line and buy space for FLICKR in the back.
Yeah, Zeus is the highest damage per minute player at the entire tournament as a top laner. Last time we saw that, Emily Rand?
The Shy!
Yes.
Which G2 fans probably don't want to remember.
That's not what they want to hear. But both top laners filling very different roles for their teams. I'm excited to see them clash here today. It's time to check in with our MasterCard fan predictions. Make sure you vote every day at MasterCard Nexus on Twitter. There's only one more day to vote, and that would be for tomorrow's best of 5 finals. But let's see where the fans land on this one. I'm honestly a little surprised. Just again, based on the demographic of the people that we're appealing to. But there is faith in T1 to get that revenge in a best of 5 against G2.
So I'm kind of caught between the rock and a hard place here, because it feels like this is going to be an incredibly close series. And a lot of it comes down to, how the early game for T1 pans out, how they manage their mid game, and if G2 can kind of solidify that advantage for Caps in the mid lane and then actually play towards their mid game strengths, right? Because it feels like we've seen time and time again that T1 have this fantastic early game. You look against basically both games that we had against G2, T1 have been able to run away with this in the early stages, but at least in that first game, because G2 had that great team fight comp, they're able to come back to it. And that's where I kind of lean on maybe G2 being able to find their advantages is in the mid game with team fighting, because we continuously see these T1 Baron flips.
All right, a lot of smart talky things. And is this correct here?
Yeah, that's a 3-2.
3-2 is the call.
I'm wearing the badge. I gotta go with it.
Wow.
That would have been a really a sweet bait, actually, though, after all of this.
Just
to
take
go
it off,
over to
throw it.
T1 side.
I was gonna say, I didn't pick EG yesterday, but
Emily, what do you got for us?
So similarly, I don't necessarily think it's going to go to a 3-2. I am going 3-2 on the T1 side. I typically use this kind of thing more as Jat would say on our LCS desk, a confidence monitor in both teams. These are two teams that have shown really, really strong like highs and then have had some lower lows in their games at this event. And they are both teams that are stronger in best of fives, which I think is another very interesting thing. T1 in best of series are incredibly strong, and G2 are able to use their draft and their really strong coaching staff as well in best of fives. So I just think that overall, I give T1 the edge. I don't think they're going to be, having as much Baron trouble. Hopefully, they've ironed that out, and they seem to be drafting a lot more comfortably as well.
All right, well, a split decision.
Okay, look, here's the deal. It's semifinals. Drop that there. I don't need this wishy-washy. I don't need this 3-2. Because, look, I agree with all your analysis. I think it might even be very T1 favored. I'd say 60-40 to T1. But just because it's 60% doesn't mean I can't bet on the 40.
That's right.
If you bet on the 40 back in the day up against RNG when Perks was in Game 5, you would have been right. Hell, it might have been even 30. Could have done it in 2019. You would have been right then, too. Because just because they're the predicted favorites doesn't mean that you can't believe in them, and sure as hell doesn't mean I can't predict them.
Okay.
3-0 G2. Because if they're going to win, it's going to be dominant.
Also, the worse the odds, the better the payout.
60%
In
of the time, the worse none of
2019,
the time.
these teams faced off in 2 epic best of fives, and now we finally get the rematch in the knockout stage between the most winning team in League of Legends history, T1, and the 2019 MSI champions.